What if I told you that during the worst economic collapse in American history, there was a group of people who didn't lose a single farm, didn't stand in a single breadline, didn't accept a single dollar of government relief, and that the federal government actually studied them, understood exactly what they were doing right, and then quietly buried the report for over 80 years? That's not a conspiracy theory. That's a documented fact sitting in the United States National Archives. And tonight, everything that was buried comes back out. Let's start with what most people get completely wrong about the Great Depression. Picture this. When most Americans close their eyes and imagine 1932, they see men in tattered suits, standing in soup lines, stretching around city blocks. They see dust storms swallowing entire towns whole. They see families packing everything they own into broken-down Model Ts and driving west toward nothing. That's the image. That's the story that was told. But about 300 miles east of those dust storms, in the rolling green farmland of Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, something almost impossible was happening. A community of plain-dressed horse and buggy farmers was thriving, not surviving, thriving. Full pantries, money in the bank, not a single member on government relief, not one farm foreclosed. And when federal agricultural researchers finally drove out to study them, because even Washington couldn't ignore what was happening. What those researchers found was so threatening to the entire economic apparatus of the United States that the report was filed, forgotten, and never once shared with the American public. Until now. What you're about to hear is what the Amish knew that nobody else seemed to remember. 20 principles that got them through the Depression without losing a single thing. And here's what makes this different from every other homesteading video you've ever seen. You don't need land. You don't need to build a barn. You can do most of these in the house you're already living in this weekend for under $100 total. This is Secret Vault, and we're going all the way in. The first principle is the one that costs you absolutely nothing, and it is the most quietly powerful of all 20. The Amish called it thinking before spending, but the way it actually works is through a specific set of 5 questions that every Amish household walks through in order before money ever changes hands. When something breaks or runs out, the first question is, can I make this myself? If the answer is no, the second question is, can I trade for it with a neighbor? If that's also no, the third question is, can I pay cash for it right now? If not, the fourth, can I take a small short-term loan and pay it off this season? And only after all 4 of those come back empty does the 5th question get asked. Can I repair or repurpose what I already have? Here's what that looks like in practice. There's a story from a book called Money Secrets of the Amish about a family that had a pile of worn-out clothing, garments so threadbare that most Americans would have thrown them in a trash bag without a second thought. Instead, this family tore the fabric into strips, wove those strips into rugs, and traded the rugs, 50 or 60 of them, for a live milking cow. They turned a bag of rags into a year's worth of dairy. Meanwhile, the average American household throws away around $300 of clothing every single year. Think about what that closet could become if 5 questions were asked before the trash bag was opened. The second principle is the rain barrel, and this is where you start to see just how deliberately we were taught to forget these things. The Amish never stopped catching rainwater. City dwellers were slowly conditioned to believe it was old-fashioned, unsanitary, and unnecessary. But here's the reality. A standard residential roof during an average rainstorm sheds well over 600 gallons of clean water. That water is free. In most states, collecting it for garden use, livestock, or cleaning requires no permit and no registration. A single barrel under a single downspout saves the average household between $40 and $100 a year in water costs and gives you a meaningful emergency reserve when drought hits. During the Depression, paying for municipal water simply wasn't an option for most rural families. The Amish never stopped doing what worked. The third principle sounds strange the first time you hear it, but stay with me. It was called coffee soup, when bread went stale in an Amish household. And in the Depression, no bread ever went stale without a plan. A woman would tear it into pieces, pour hot black coffee over it, add a splash of cream or milk, and a small spoon of sugar if she had it. They served it as breakfast. It used the old bread. It used the last of the morning coffee. It filled a working man before he went out to spend 12 hours in the barn. Amish families in parts of Pennsylvania and Indiana still eat this dish today. The lesson isn't the recipe. The lesson is the philosophy underneath it. Nothing edible. Not a crust, not a coffee ring, not a wilted vegetable ever goes in the trash. Every scrap has a second life. Now here's where the story gets heavier, because the next set of principles is exactly where the suppression begins. What I'm about to tell you is not the government hiding aliens or faking a moon landing. It is something far more mundane and far more damaging. It is an industry deciding that your self-sufficiency was bad for business, and then spending a century making sure you forgot how to be self-sufficient. The fourth principle is the root cellar, and this is where the war on independent food storage really started. Before the 1950s, almost every rural American home had one, a small underground or partially buried room that held a natural temperature between 32 and 40 degrees year-round, with no electricity, no motor, no bill. Potatoes, carrots, beets, turnips, cabbages, winter squash, and apples could sit in a properly built root cellar for 6 to 8 months without spoiling. The Amish never abandoned this. A root cellar built with your own labor costs less than $400 in materials and can hold over 1,000 pounds of food. Compare that to a chest freezer, $600 to buy, $150 a year to run, and a complete total loss the moment your power goes out for more than 2 days. Root cellars didn't disappear from American homes because they stopped working. They stopped being built because the appliance industry needed you buying refrigerators. One stopped working for you, the other started working for them. The fifth principle is canning, and not the polite, decorative canning you see on weekend cooking shows. Depression era, canning was serious, systematic food security. Amish and Mennonite women during the 1930s put up between 400 and 700 quart jars in a single summer. They tracked consumption. They budgeted everything. Their grocery store visits were reduced to almost nothing. Flour and sugar were the primary purchases. Everything else, every vegetable, every fruit, every condiment, came from the garden, the orchard, the smokehouse, or the community trade network. A quart jar of green beans canned at home costs about 30 cents in materials. That same can from a grocery store today costs over $2. Multiply 400 jars by that difference, and you've saved over $600 in a single season, eating fresher food than anything sitting in a tin can on a store shelf. The sixth principle is the kitchen wood stove, and this one is elegant in a way that modern design has completely abandoned. A wood stove in an Amish kitchen served 4 functions at the same time. It cooked the meals, it baked the bread, it heated the house, and it heated the water through a coil running from the back of the stove into a holding tank, 1 appliance, 4 utility bills eliminated. The rest of America was sold on 4 separate appliances: a stove, an oven, a furnace, and a water heater. Because 4 appliances means 4 separate bills, 4 replacement cycles, and 4 ongoing service contracts. Efficiency was never the goal of that design. Dependency was. The 7th principle follows directly from the stove. It is the soap kettle. Lye from wood ash mixed with rendered animal fat makes soap. That is the entire recipe, and it has worked for 3,000 years. During the Depression, Amish households made all of their own soap from materials that cost nothing. The ash from the fire they were already burning, the fat from the animals they were already raising. A full year of soap for a family of 6 cost them essentially $0. Today, soap, detergent, shampoo, and cleaning supplies for the same family runs well over $400 a year. The wood ash from one winter's heating produces more than enough lye to cover the entire year. It's sitting in your fireplace right now. The 8th principle is the kitchen garden, and the numbers here are worth sitting with for a moment. Research comparing Amish farming methods with conventional modern agriculture has consistently found that Amish methods produce higher yield per acre, use less energy, and create chemical-free harvests. The average Amish farm in Wayne County, Ohio is around 109 acres. The average American farm is over 400 acres. The Amish farm on 1/4 of the land, and it feeds a family of 7 or 8 people with surplus left over to sell or trade. The principles behind this are not mystical. Diversification, crop rotation, animal manure returned to the soil as fertilizer, saved seed year after year, adapted to local conditions. A backyard kitchen garden of a 1/4 acre, run on these same principles, can produce over 1,500 pounds of vegetables in a single growing season. A 1/4 acre. That's smaller than most suburban backyards. The 9th principle is barter, and this one challenges something most of us were never taught to question: the assumption that every transaction has to flow through a bank. The Amish do not eliminate money, they minimize their need for it. Eggs trade for milk, milk trades for honey, honey trades for lumber, lumber trades for labor. No middleman, no markup, no record, no tax form, just neighbors taking care of neighbors the way Americans did for 200 years before the financial system decided it needed a cut of every human exchange on Earth. The 10th principle is what might be the most difficult to hear, because it cuts against something we think of as progress. During the Depression, an Amish family was not one breadwinner supporting 4 consumers. It was 7 or 8 producers, each with a clear and valued role. Children fed chickens at age 6. They milked cows at 8. They drove a team at 12. They were not cheap labor, they were apprentices. The next generation of skilled, capable, self-sufficient adults being built in real time. When we remove children from meaningful work and turn them into full-time consumers with no productive role in the household, we didn't free them. We created the financial pressure that now crushes every American family from the inside out. The 11th principle is the cold pantry retrofit. And this is where things get exciting for anyone living in a conventional house right now. Find the north-facing wall of your basement or the interior wall of an attached garage that gets no direct sunlight. Build a small insulated room against that wall. Do you know what 6 feet by 6 feet is more than enough? Not using 1 inch of foam board insulation on the walls and ceiling. With a small exterior vent you can open in winter and close in summer. The temperature inside that room will stay naturally between 35 and 50 degrees from October through April. 0 electricity, 0 ongoing cost. That is a free walk-in cooler. It costs around $170 in materials, and it will hold your garden harvest through 3 full winters. Amish families use this exact technique in their dotty houses. The small attached homes built for grandparents on the family property. If you have a north-facing basement wall where you live right now, you already have everything you need. The 12th principle is window quilts. And stay with me, because the numbers on this one are real. During the Depression, before fiberglass insulation was widely available, families quilted heavy fabric panels and hung them over windows every night. A standard. Double-pane window loses roughly 10 times more heat than the wall surrounding it. A simple insulated curtain, made from old blankets, cotton batting, and a backing of denim or canvas, cuts that heat loss by 60 to 70%. Material cost is under $20 per window if you use secondhand fabric. For an average home with 12 windows, you're looking at a $300 to $400 annual reduction in heating costs. Amish homes in Lancaster County have been doing this for over a century. The 13th principle is the gravity-fed water system. Catch rainwater from your downspouts into an elevated tank. Even a 55-gallon drum on a sturdy platform 6 feet off the ground generates enough pressure to run a garden hose, fill watering cans, and feed a slow-drip irrigation system. No pump, no electricity, no bill. Entire farm operations across Amish Pennsylvania have run on this principle for generations, and it works just as well on a residential lot as it does on a working farm. The 14th principle is the clothesline. The average electric dryer costs between $120 and $200 a year to operate, and it shortens the lifespan of every garment you put in it through heat degradation. A clothesline costs $15 and lasts 30 years. Multiply $200 a year by 30 years. That is $6,000. Spent because somewhere along the way, someone convinced us that hanging up a shirt was beneath our dignity. The 15th principle is the bread starter. A wild yeast starter is flour, water, and air. It costs nothing to create and lasts indefinitely when properly maintained. A homemade loaf of bread from a starter costs about 30 cents in ingredients. A grocery store loaf of comparable quality now runs $5 to $7. A family that eats bread twice a day saves between $1,400 and $2,000 a year by baking their own. Amish women have kept the same starter cultures alive for over 100 years, passing them down from mother to daughter, the way some families pass down jewelry or land. The 16th principle is the smokehouse. Any homeowner with a small backyard can build a functional smokehouse for under $80. It is a small insulated box with a firebox at the bottom and a vent at the top. It preserves meat for 6 months to a year with no refrigeration required. During the Depression, when refrigerators were a luxury most rural families could not afford, the smokehouse was how a family kept the pork from a fall hog butchering through the entire winter and into late spring. 300 pounds of preserved meat from one animal. No electricity, no grocery store, no middleman, no expiration date stamped by someone else. The 17th principle is the herb apothecary. The Amish never stopped treating common ailments with herbs, poultices, and salves, and the research increasingly supports them. A small herb garden of 12 to 15 plants covers most household first aid needs for under $30 a year. Compare that to the average American household pharmacy spend. The difference isn't just financial, it's a fundamentally different relationship with your own body and health. The 18th principle is the wood ash garden. Wood ash from a stove or fireplace is potash, a natural fertilizer rich in potassium and calcium that raises soil pH, repels slugs, and feeds vegetable plants. The ash is free. It comes from the fire you're already burning. The global chemical fertilizer industry is worth over $200 billion annually. That industry depends entirely on you forgetting that the answer was already sitting in your fireplace. The 19th principle is the community workday, or what the Amish have called a barn raising for 300 years. When the Amish need a barn built, they don't hire a contractor and wait 6 months. They send word, and on the appointed morning, 80 to 200 neighbors arrive. The barn is standing by sunset. The cost is shared meals and the obligation to show up at the next neighbor's raising. Imagine 200 people moving like one organism. No foreman, no architect, no invoice. There is no law preventing American neighborhoods from doing exactly this. There is nothing stopping 12 households from spending one Saturday a month splitting firewood together, putting up food together, repairing each other's roofs together. Each family would save thousands of dollars a year and gain something no amount of money can actually purchase, a community that cannot be taken from them. And now, the 20th, the one I told you to stay for, the one that comes directly from a 1942 field report written by a United States Department of Agriculture researcher named Walter Cole Morgan, a document that federal authorities read in full, understood completely, and chose not to share with the American public for over 80 years. Cole Morgan was assigned to the Rural Life Studies program, launched by the USDA's Bureau of Agricultural Economics in 1939. His task was to study the Old Order Amish of Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. His report, titled simply Old Order Amish of Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, has since been called by scholars the founding document of Amish studies as an academic discipline. It is a primary government document, and buried inside it is a finding that federal authorities openly admitted held an answer the rest of the country desperately needed. Here is what Cole Morgan found. During the entire decade of the Great Depression, all 10 years, the Amish of Lancaster County maintained good homes, kept money in the bank, and refused both state and federal relief. Not as a political statement, not as a protest. As a practical consequence of one specific economic structure they had been quietly running for 3 centuries. Cole Morgan called it a mutual aid economy. Here's how it worked. Picture this. When a family suffered a crisis, a barn fire, a sudden illness, a crop failure, a death, the community did not form a committee. They did not start a fundraiser. They did not file paperwork. They held an alms collection. Every household in the community contributed a specific share based on what they could give. The total was delivered in cash directly to the family and need within the same week. No insurance company, no bank, no government program, no interest, no premiums, no waiting period, no adjuster arriving 3 weeks later to tell you what your suffering is actually worth. The 20th principle is to build your own version of this where you live. It does not require a church. It does not require a shared religion or ideology. It requires between 12 and 20 households willing to contribute $20 or $30 a month into a shared emergency fund held by a trusted neighbor under one rule. The fund exists solely for emergencies that hit any member family. A broken furnace in January, a sudden medical bill, a funeral, storm damage to a roof. Whatever the family needs in that moment, the fund covers it. No paperwork, no interest, no waiting. The Amish have operated this structure for over 300 years. It survived the Great Depression without a single failure. It survived 2 world wars. It survives every recession, every inflation, every financial crisis. Embarrassed. Because it does not depend on a system that can be devalued, defunded, or denied. It depends entirely on the people who live within walking distance of your front door. And here is the part that should make you furious. Federal authorities in 1939, looking at this mutual aid system, watching it work in real time while the rest of the country stood in lines waiting for government cheese, wrote in their own documents that Washington ought to be studying these farmers because they might find a procedure simpler and less involved than the entire New Deal apparatus. They never did the study. Because a procedure that works without Washington makes Washington unnecessary. And no government agency in the history of this country has ever funded its own obsolescence. That is the suppression. Not a law on the books. Not a conspiracy in a dark room. A study that was quietly shelved. A finding that was read, understood, and filed away. Here at Secret Vault, that's exactly the kind of buried knowledge we pull back into the light. You didn't lose these 20 principles because they stopped working. You lost them because someone made more money when you forgot. The grain of wheat isn't less nutritious because a corporation convinced you to buy the processed version. The rainwater isn't less clean because a utility company convinced you to pay for the municipal version. The neighbor network isn't less effective because an insurance company convinced you to trust a policy instead of a person. Every single one of these 20 principles still works today exactly the way it worked in 1932. The root cellar still holds 1,000 pounds of food at 38 degrees with 0 electricity. The wood ash still grows the garden. The bread starter still rises. The alms collection still covers the furnace in January when nothing else will. What the Amish figured out, what Walter Cole Morgan documented, what Washington buried, and what you just recovered tonight, is that real security was never stored in a bank account or guaranteed by a government program. Real security is built with your hands, grown in your garden, preserved in your pantry, and held by your neighbors. The moment you stop needing the system stops controlling you. And it turns out, all you ever really needed was the knowledge that someone decided you were better off without.